In 3, 2, and 1.
Good afternoon, Democrats. Libby, are you going to start us off here?
I am. Let's just let folks join a little bit. I see everybody rolling in here. We'll give it 1 minute to folks who are joining. For those who don't know, I mentioned to the chairman that we have a record-breaking crowd on this call. So we're very grateful to those who joined us. For those of you who I haven't had an opportunity to meet virtually or otherwise, my name is Libby Schneider and I'm the DNC Rural Political Director. I've been on board since April of 2019, so have been able to meet many of you in person and virtually. But wanted to welcome you here and introduce our chairwoman of the council. But first, just some sort of rules of the road. We have closed captioning on this webinar, so if that's something you need or would find helpful, you can click below. You'll see the closed captioning button, and our closed captioner Tracy is on doing the Lord's work. So thank you to her. And then I'll intro Kylie, who is Kylie stepped up as chair of the DNC Rural Council in August after Betty, our dear friend Betty Ritchie, who I think is also on the call, stepped down from the DNC, and Kylie will serve in this capacity until our summer meeting. So Madam Chairwoman, go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Libby, for your incredible work with the DNC Rural Council and our rural political department. I'm so excited to be with you all today. As Libby mentioned, we have what we think is close to 500 or more than 500 people on the line today, which is amazing. We have never had this much engagement with our rural Democrats at the national level, and so we're very excited to see that. I am very proud to serve as chair of the North Dakota Democratic NPL Party. And as Libby also mentioned, was very excited to take on the role of chair of the Rural Council when my friend Betty did not run for re-election to the DNC last summer. And so we have big shoes to fill with the great work that Betty did. And one of those things was bringing Libby Schneider on board. Libby is the first director of political outreach for our rural constituency that we've had. And we're really excited about the work that she's done and that we've collectively done to build up our rural voices. But we know that that work is only beginning. And so we're excited to hear today from some of our national officers and then take some questions from all of you and chart a path forward for rural Democrats across the country. And so with that, I'm excited to introduce our first speaker, who is a good friend of mine, Jason Ray. Jason was just reelected to his second term as secretary of the DNC. And as someone who has worked closely with Jason and seen the work that he's done to really overhaul and transform the secretary's office and the work that they do, I know how instrumental he has been and he and his team have been to our success for the past 4 years and how important their work will be moving forward. So Jason, thanks so much for taking time to be with us today.
Well, thanks, Kylie, and thanks for all of your leadership. I'm excited to be here. Thanks, Libby, as well, for the phenomenal work you're doing. And I see, again, that my good friend Betty Ritchie is on the line. Betty, thanks for all of your service over all of the years to the DNC. But as someone who grew up in rural northwestern Wisconsin, I'm really excited to be here. And honestly, just listen in on the conversation today with our phenomenal new chair, Jamie Harrison. You know, Chair Harrison comes from a background of being a dirt road Democrat who ran a statewide campaign in a red state, but he's also a friend and a colleague who's been with the DNC, involved with state parties and Democratic politics for as long as I can remember. While we were colleagues over the last cycle, you know, the DNC really enacted a rural program that engaged state parties, rural activists, rural elected officials, and offered specific training, messaging, events, and GOTV efforts over the course of that cycle. And I know that he is excited to get to work, which is why I'm glad to be here to hear this conversation about how we can do even more to win in rural America and support President Biden. So I just want to thank all of you across the country, our Rural Caucus members, our DNC members, other activists who are doing the amazing work on the ground day in and day out. So thank you so much for your work. Thanks for having me today to listen in on the conversation about how we're going to continue moving forward together. So I'll turn it back to you, Kylie.
So thanks so much, Jason. We're really grateful that you take some time to join our Rural Democrats today. And it is my distinct honor to introduce our next guest. And Jason shared a little bit about Jamie, and a lot of you have gotten to know him over the past couple of years. I've gotten to know Jamie as he himself is a former state party chair, and so we served together in the ASDC, and he's also a fellow attorney. And so I appreciate the sense of justice that Jamie brings to his work. And again, many of you know some about his background, but he was the first African-American man elected to be chair of the South Carolina Democratic Party. He also formerly worked for the legendary Congressman Jim Clyburn and served as an associate vice chair for the DNC before being elected as our chair this year. And many of you know Jamie mostly from his work in taking Lindsey Graham to task and really showing what an incredible, powerful campaign can look like in a red state. And he knows what it takes to run in rural areas and what it takes to talk to rural voters, because he's been a rural voter. He knows those values. He knows what's important to rural red state Democrats and rural blue state Democrats. And Jamie, we're just very grateful that you would be here. I think every DNC Rural Council meeting that I've been at, Jamie has been at, which probably was partially because of his love for Betty Ritchie, but also because he loves the work of the Rural Council. So Jamie, thank you so much for being with us, and we'll pass it over to you. Oh, Jamie, you're muted. Hold up. There we go.
Unmute. There we go. Well, hello, Democrats, and thank you, Kylie, for that kind introduction. Thank you for your leadership and your friendship, and for stepping up to lead the council when former chair and my dear friend, Betty Ritchie, retired from the DNC in August. I love Betty so much, and we have done some good things together, and I'm looking forward to it. I know she's still in the fight with us. And I want to thank my good friend, Jason Ray, the secretary of this great party. And Jason works so hard for the party each and every day. And of course, Libby, who is our staff person who oversees the Rural Council and all the great work that she does. We've been so lucky to have such great leadership, and I'm grateful to these women and my good friend, Jason Ray, for putting in the hard work. It's great to be with all of you for the first stop on what we are calling a Chair Chats Tour. This is going to be my listening session as I begin over the next few weeks. I'll be meeting with the councils and the caucuses across the DNC to hear your vision for the party and the tools you need in order to elect Democrats up and down the ballot across this great nation of ours. Let's just hope that I don't click that cat filter by accident while we're on one of these Zoom calls. But listen, I'm excited to kick off this tour with the Rural Council. And let me tell you why. Some of you have heard me tell this story, but a few years ago, I was chair of the South Carolina Democratic Party, and I was in a rural county in South Carolina. I was going down a dirt road, and I pulled into a shotgun house to put out a sign. And I knocked on the door, and there was an old African-American man who opened up, and he said, "What do you want?" I said, "Sir, my name is Jamie Harrison. I'm the chair of the South Carolina Democratic, and this is the most consequential election of our lifetime." And he stopped me. He said, "Son, stop right there." He said, he asked me, he said, "You see that road you drove up on?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "What kind of road is that?" I said, "It's a dirt road." He said, "Son, that was a dirt road when Ronald Reagan was president. That was a dirt road when the Bushes were president. It was a dirt road when Bill Clinton and Obama were president. And son, that's still a goddamn dirt road. And until a Democrat or Republican paves that road, I don't want to deal with any of you." And he shut his door and he went back in his house. Now, I was a little into my feelings, but I really started thinking about what he meant. That road is symbolic of so many rural communities across the country. For some, it's a dirt road. For others, it's a hospital or a school or the lack of broadband. So I'm here to say we are done at just looking at cities while forgetting those who live on dirt roads across this country. Now, there's no doubt that we've made progress. We're a long way from where we were after 2016. We've taken back the House, we've taken the Senate, the White House, and seats across the country down the ballot. This was no overnight success. It was hard work. It was a result of smart and strategic investments and tireless grassroots organizing, especially in rural communities. In the lead up to November's election, the DNC invested in rural communities through our SPIF grants and battleground build-up programs. Our DNC War Room played a critical role in localizing Trump's betrayal of rural Americans. And under Chair Perez, we hired Libby, our first rural director at the DNC. Libby and our organizing team have worked each day not only to engage rural voters, but to organize them on the ground. In fact, she was one of 3 DNC staffers we sent to Kentucky to help lift Andy Beshear to victory. And she continues to be a vital part of our team at the DNC. Of course, we still have more work to do. We still have more communities to reach and more voters to engage. And I know that while 2020 was a good year overall for our party, there are also places where we can do better. And that's why I'm here today, to listen to your ideas and your vision for the Democratic Party, because you are the tip of the spear. You are on the ground talking to voters every day, and you know better than anyone what we need to do to succeed in rural communities. So over the next hour, I want us to have a conversation to see where we can build on our progress, where we can create new opportunities, and how we can work together to support President Biden and Vice President Harris, and so that we can build back better in every community across this great nation. So thank you all again. You know, when folks ask me, Jamie, what kind of Democrat are you? And I say, I'm a dirt road Democrat, because I grew up on a dirt road and I understand the joys and the hardships of living in rural communities. I'm looking forward to talking to you about how we empower those communities, how we make folks understand that the Democratic Party sees them, that the Democratic Party hears them, but most importantly, that we value them and will fight for them. That's what it means. And so I'm looking forward to this discussion, listening and taking down your ideas on how we can build back better, particularly in rural communities. So with that, I'll turn it back to Libby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome aboard. Before I hand it over to Kylie, just want to say I see some of you inserting your questions into the Q&A. Please continue to do that. We'll get to as many as we can. We also solicited from everyone questions via email in advance, and we've got some of those. So I'll hand it over to the chairwoman to ask. Go ahead, Kylie.
Great, thanks, Libby, and thanks, Jamie, for those comments. We've got a lot of questions here from folks. Our first one is from our friend John in Georgia. And John is wondering, one of the things that he thinks the Biden campaign and the DNC did really well in 2020 was the relationship building and outreach to rural communities of color, which had been overlooked in the past a little bit. Jamie, what are your thoughts on what the DNC and what the Biden White House will be doing to ensure we maintain those relationships and build on them in the future?
John, thank you for bringing that up. And that's one of the things, the myths that we have to dispel, that I think across the country, that sometimes when folks think you say rural, it automatically means that they're only referring to white voters in rural America. But rural America is just as diverse as urban America. We have Black, Brown, Asian, and Native folks, in addition to our white brothers and sisters who live in rural communities as well. And they're all a part of that greater ecosystem. And so we have to continue to make sure that we're investing in that. The way that I really see that we can continue to make inroads is by addressing the issues that people are dealing with in those communities. One of the things that you see across rural America right now in terms of a big hole that needs to be filled is the lack of broadband infrastructure in these communities. In South Carolina, 38% of rural communities do not have access to broadband. And some of the communities that do have internet access, it's slower than what you would find in Cuba or Venezuela. That's not good enough. When we're in the midst of a pandemic that is forcing people to work from home and they educate their kids from home, that means rural America is suffering at a greater rate than other parts of the nation and of the country. And that most importantly, it's our kids that are really suffering. And so we got to make sure that and we have to make it plain and speak in plain English about how we are going to engage and address the issues that people are dealing with. And particularly in rural communities of color, some of these disparities are even greater in terms of what we find. We know that particularly across the South in rural communities, we're seeing, and I know it's happening in the Midwest is also, when you have Republicans in control of the legislature, they refuse to expand Medicaid. And so as a result of the lack of expansion of Medicaid, rural hospitals are closing at a rapid pace across this country. And when a hospital closes, doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican, whether you're black and white, it doesn't matter if you voted for Trump or Joe Biden. When that hospital closes, it's like ripping the heart out of a community. The businesses fall apart. And now it takes people, instead of taking them 10 or 15 or 20 minutes to get to the hospital, it takes them 30 or 40 or almost an hour to get to the closest hospital. That can be a death sentence. So what we have to do, not only for the communities of color in rural America, but I believe all of rural America, is make sure we are addressing these great disparities that we see in healthcare, in environmental issues, in infrastructure. I mean, I talked about on my race the number of toxic septic tanks that we had in South Carolina, right? Our senators never talk about those issues, but those are real issues for folks who aren't on the sewer system. And when you aren't on the sewer system, you can't encourage businesses into those areas. And when you can't encourage businesses into your areas, the economy is not as strong as it should be. And those things are impacting all of our communities. And we need to make sure that we are adequately addressing those.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that. Mr. Chairman, our next question is from our friend Josh in Missouri. And Josh said, first, thank you for running such a thoughtful and important campaign against Lindsey Graham. You were a candidate in a very rural state, and so he's wondering what you learned about campaigning in rural areas that you plan to use in your leadership of the DNC and its rural programs.
Well, thank you for that. It was Josh, right? Yes. Yep. Thank you for that, Josh, and I appreciate the support. You know, one of the things that I did on my campaign and something that I hope to see more of from some of our candidates in rural America is that I had a rural hope agenda, an actual 5-point plan, and it was very robust. I had a committee that we spent probably about 3 months talking to mayors and county council folks and city council folks and people in the community about some of the things that they were struggling with and that they needed some real leadership. I believe that it's important that the Democratic Party, again, start to talk about those things and to actually have an agenda for how we are going to address that when we are in leadership positions. That's really important to do. And so, you know, one of the things I hope to encourage is that our state parties work with their members in the legislature and also with their congressional staff and their candidates to develop agendas for addressing the needs of rural America. I think that's the really important first step. Does that mean then we're going to totally win over rural America just because we have an agenda? No, but we start to lay the foundation to build trust. We start to lay a foundation to let those folks understand and to see the contrast that the Republican Party says they are for rural America. But here is our action. We're putting our words into actions about how we will address the needs of communities. And so I hope that I can work with Kylie and this council to have a real robust rural agenda moving forward, and that we share that agenda across this country.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll jump in here and then hand it back to Kylie, but wanted to get to a couple of questions from folks who are posting them live in the chat or in the Q&A. I'm combining one here because it's very similar from both Governor Walters in Oklahoma, Dee Owens in Indiana, and Susan, and I'm not sure where Susan's at, but essentially they're asking, what's the party going to do for these state parties in red or, formerly purple, but now red states that are struggling with resources, or in the case of Oklahoma, don't have a federal delegation with any Democrats in it?
A very interesting question. I just had a conversation actually today with our friends at the White House, particularly about, federal appointments. When you don't have anybody in your congressional delegation, a Democrat, who makes recommendations for U.S. attorney for some of these states? Who makes recommendations for appointments for federal positions in those states? We're working out a process so that we can give those states and the Democratic Party in those states some say. And I think that's really, really important that we do that. And so we'll work with our chairs in those particular states to come up with a process by which we can get those nominations in to key people at the White House. In terms of our focus on states, when I became the chair, and even before I became chair, everybody knows I consider myself a Howard Dean acolyte. I wholeheartedly believe in the 50-state strategy. We cannot be a majority party when we cede states to the Republican Party, when we don't even roll up our sleeves to fight for them. That can't work. We got to be able to roll up our sleeves and commit to fight and represent Democrats in every state in our union, regardless if it's the reddest of the red states. We can't give up. We got to continue to push. We got to give people a contrast. And I also understand, as a former state party chair, that the basic foundation of our party is at the state party level, that we are only as strong as our weakest link. And if we have weak state parties because they don't have the people power, if they don't have the technology, if they don't have the infrastructure, then the whole thing will fall apart. And so I have given the state chairs my commitment. We have the same commitment from the White House and the leaders in Joe Biden, that we're going to do all that we can to strengthen state parties over the course of the next few years, meaning more resources, more in-kind contributions, shoring up their technology, helping them with voter protection, even helping them in the effort on redistricting that is going on in states right now. And so that's really important to us. It's personally important to me from somebody who's coming from a red state. I believe that South Carolina can turn blue one day. Will it happen, overnight? No. Rome wasn't built in a day. South Carolina won't flip overnight. But if we continue to chip away at it, it eventually will.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next questions from CT in Minnesota, my former neighbor in North Dakota. As part of your role as chair, do you plan on making any stops in rural areas, thinking about up here in North Dakota, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and other rural places across the country?
Say that again. The first part of that,
Sure. Yep. So, Mr. Chairman, the question is if you'll, as chair, if you plan on making any stops in rural areas across the country.
I once we get COVID behind us, we plan on taking this show on the road. It's really important. I hope during my tenure as chair to visit every state in our union, because I believe it's important as the chair of the DNC, which means I'm the chair of the DNC, the national organization, that I go everywhere and I make sure that I take our message of hope and how we're building back better to every state in the union. And so I even talked with Reverend Barber just recently about the need to go into these communities so that folks understand that we see them, that we hear them, that we are working on their behalf. So I hope to visit all of you in all of your states. Now, some of your states, I'm not coming there in the winter. I'm from South Carolina. I can't deal with too much snow, y'all. But I do hope to get an opportunity to spend some time with each and every one.
I've got some cold weather gear that you can borrow. I think probably spot you too. Thank you. And again, thanks to everybody posting the questions. We'll try to get to as many as we can, but please know that if we don't, I will follow up with you. I will copy and paste the chat so that we can go into it later. But I saw this question both in email and in the chat from John and from Kevin via email, Mr. Chairman. And maybe you can speak to your personal experience on this, but what's the party and what's our strategy going forward for how we combat the sort of right-wing news, 24-hour news cycle in people's homes in rural America?
Part of what another thing that we did on my campaign, this is part of the challenge, folks, is that many folks in our communities, in rural communities, feel as though they've been abandoned by the Democratic Party. That we only concern ourselves with what's going on the coast and in the cities, and that we don't really care about them and their issues and the things that they're going through. So how do you rebuild that trust? Or not even rebuild it, how do you build trust in those communities? It's not good enough to just talk about what we believe in, because, talk is, as my grandfather would often say, talk is cheap. For many of these folks, you have to show and not tell. You have to show them that you are committed to helping them. And it's not good enough to say, well, you just wait until I get elected and then you'll see. It's just like that guy who I met on the dirt road. There were Democrats and Republicans who had said for years, for decades, we're gonna invest in infrastructure. And his road had still not been paved. We're gonna fix schools, and the schools are still falling apart. We're gonna have healthcare, and people still don't have healthcare. Actually, they're losing their healthcare. We're gonna bring jobs to your community, and there's no jobs to be found. So it's not good enough to say those things. We have to go and build trust. How do you do that? How do you do that when you are a Democrat in a red state where you can't get elected because Democrats aren't getting elected? How do you still build the trust in those communities? We did something on my campaign that was unique, and I believe it's something that we saw some traction. And I think when you continue it, you will eventually break through. It was a program that I built into my campaign called Harrison Helps. And actually, it was a spinoff or something that I did when I was state party chair, and it was called Democrats Care. And I think a few states have even adopted. I think Kansas was one of the states that have a Democrats Care effort. In essence, you go into the communities, you partner with community organizations that are doing good work on the ground. So on the campaign, I work with Habitat for Humanity. I work with battered women's shelters. We worked with the Ronald McDonald House. I went and actually made dinners for parents whose kids were at children's hospitals. We did cleanup sessions. We worked with the disability community to move things. We did all kinds of things so that folks understood that it wasn't just about words, but I was living my values, and that I was interested in not only helping them in the future when I got elected, but I was interested in doing what I could as a candidate right now to help people. It is through your actions that you build trust with folks and not just your words. And so one of the things I hope that we can do on a national level and within all our state parties is start up some type of Democrats Care or Democrats Helping initiative where we're on the ground working with community organizations to address the needs of people right now. Not 2 months before the election, not a few weeks before the election, but right now. And then that is how we win the hearts and minds of the people in those communities, because then they can say, well, you know, my Republican member of Congress has never come out here to help me. My Republican city council member has never helped my kid get a backpack or for school. They've never helped and put on a job fair. But these Democrats are doing something. maybe they are different. And that's how you plant that seed, and eventually seed grows, and then you get that window of opportunity to really make a difference. Now, I hope we can do that all across the country, but particularly in our rural communities.
Great, thanks, Mr. Chairman. And that's, learning from your lessons in North Dakota, we did adopt a MNPL CARES program up here and encouraged our local parties to engage in service projects and raising money for local food pantries and domestic violence shelters and hosting blood drives. And it was really successful, especially in one of our most rural counties in Northeast North Dakota. Every few weeks they were in the newspaper for another project that they were doing as local Democrats. And so know that we heard you share those stories a few years ago and we implemented it. So another question, kind of like Libby did, combining a few questions here from Anderson in North Carolina, who was a field organizer in 2020, and Shelley in North Dakota, who was a candidate for governor in 2020. There's a lot of questions about, what resources or tools we can expect for state parties, and, alongside that, what infrastructure changes we might see at the DNC to provide those resources and tools, of course, geared towards rural organizing and in year-round organizing programs.
Yeah, well, and thank you for that. Well, part of this is, and it's the reason why I can't wait to really engage with our state party chairs and vice chairs and EDs more, is to just figure out that, I don't have all the answers. But many times there are folks on the ground who do have answers. They just don't have the resources in order to leverage those answers. They have the solutions to the problems that they're facing. They just don't have the resources in order to actually enact that. So I hope to learn from our state party chairs and vice chairs and EDs over the course of the next few months to figure out what are ways we can leverage DNC resources to better equip them. But in the near term, I do have some ideas. One of the things that we have at the DNC is a department called the Best Practices Institute, which is in essence the training arm of the DNC. We are going to make the training component of what we do at the DNC even more robust than it is now. Many of you participate through our T3 program that's there to allow you to get sufficient training to be an organizer on the ground in the communities that you're in. But we're also thinking with this eye towards empowerment, right? That Harrison Helps or that Democrats Care effort. Because it's not about us just going to communities and saying, here's how you can help us. But it is us going to folks saying, here's how we can help you. Let's have training sessions. And some folks, well, this is mission creep. No, it's not mission creep because our mission is to help people in the communities where they are. And so we're going to have some resources that I hope to bring to bear to our state parties to help them in terms of candidate services. Many candidates have to have debates. Many of them don't have the training to know how to prepare for debates. We have that know-how in our party. So we will have a training module just on how to prepare for your first debate, right? Many candidates are first-time candidates. They don't know how to raise money, and they definitely don't know how to raise grassroots money. A module, how to raise money, a candidate 101. And so we're looking at a lot of these things that candidates just need and state parties need in order to provide to their candidates to help them figure out how to build a campaign that they can win. In addition, we're looking at things under this sort of Democrats Care effort on how we can empower people from, how to write a resume to job interview skills to homeownership workshops. We're looking at ways that we can help to empower people doing the things that they need. We're also looking at technologies that we can provide to shore up the technologies to protect our state parties from being hacked, to give them some services. We're looking at how we can create economies of scale so that, if a state party can't afford their own tech person because they can't afford a $60,000 or $65,000 salary, how can we allow the state party instead to just pay in to having a tech person by, contributing a modest a stipend to paying for one that is shared amongst other state parties. So we're trying to be as creative as we possibly can to assist our state parties to address all of the issues that they're dealing with on a monthly basis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One from a young rural person in the audience, from Caleb in Nebraska. Caleb's the chair of Young Democrats of America Rural Caucus, and he says, we often talk about the rural brain drain and the desire for many BIPOC and LGBTQIA people who want to live in more inclusive and accessible communities. Do you think the DNC can play a larger part in supporting rural candidates up and down the ballot to make their communities more inclusive and accessible, even if they don't garner much national attention because of how red they are? And what would that look like?
Well, one of the things I hope to do here, and listen, and Jason, if you have, Jason, who's on here I guess, Jason, you first got in by organizing Young Democrats. And so, Jason, if there are any questions that you would like to add in, and I know this one may be one right down your alley, feel free. One of the things that I think also is important for us in terms of the engagement of young folks and running for office is the development of fellowships in our states in order to begin to train and cultivate our young talent. One of the things I did as a state party chair is I created such a fellowship. Because when I came into my party as the chair, the average age of our county party chairs in South Carolina was about 65. And the way that they noticed meetings was through snail mail. They didn't even use email. No, they didn't have Facebook pages. There was no electronic interface with folks to encourage them to come to these meetings. And I knew that had to change. We had to bring some youth and vitality to our party. And perspective. That is not to dismiss or diminish the senior wisdom that we had. It's just that to be a vibrant party, you have to encompass all of that diversity. And so we created this fellowship. We called it the James E. Clyburn Political Fellowship. And I had in mind that, I thought that this was going to be great. I had no idea how successful it would actually become. We now have over 150 fellows across South Carolina. We structured it so that we would have a fellow from every county every year. And we have created this pipeline of talent who are running for and winning county council, city council. Some of our county, about a third of our county chairs right now are Clyburn fellows. We've had Clyburn fellows to run for Congress. And it has changed the game in South Carolina. And it's the Clyburn fellows who are leading the party right now. I think we can have that type of program across this nation in every single state, and equipping our young people with the talents, not only to be the leaders of the future, but being the leaders of right now, because we need that leadership right now. And so, those are the types of things that I would like to have the DNC cultivate and invest in our state parties. And so I'm also talking with the leaders of the Young Democrats and our college Democrats. The only person I haven't talked to yet is our president of the high school Dems, but I expect to talk to them soon as well, because I have a new mission for them. And I want them to be engaged at a level that they have not been engaged in a very, very long time. And so, Jason, you may have some thoughts on this as well. I'll turn it to you.
Well, I'll just point out, Kylie and I were just messaging here, and everyone participating in this call is definitely under 50 today, at least leading this call here. So we're seeing young Democrats and young leaders and new voices stepping up to the plate and really helping lead in rural America. You got, Kylie in North Dakota and others who are leading the way. So I'm excited for the direction under your leadership, Mr. Chair, to really engage and build an inclusive community and engage more young people in our party.
Thank you, my friend.
Okay, I'll jump in and then let Kylie ask, but this is sort of related, and I know it's on the tops of lots of these folks' minds. Stacy asked, we're headed into elections for their local parties. What's your pitch to encourage people to be involved in party leadership? And I'll expand on that to say also run for office. Stacy is currently a county chair and has a lot of trouble filling precinct officer positions, and I know that's true for folks who are asking candidates to run too.
Well, I cannot overstate how important it is for us to get more people to run for office. We have to provide folks with a contrast. And there's a stark contrast right now. The Republican Party is a dumpster fire. It is a complete hot mess. When they are censuring each other, calling each other names, they are doing they're talking about starting their own party. They are losing hundreds of thousands of registered Republicans each. And over the course of just these past few weeks, I think I read something recently that 140,000 Republican folks are now not registered as Republicans. That's how much they've lost across the country. And so we have a rare opportunity right now to take advantage of that. And to provide people with a contrast, real leadership that is not about conspiracy theories, but coming up with solutions to the problems that people are dealing with. COVID, and I'm concerned right now. I tweeted about this the other day. How are we getting the COVID vaccines out to rural communities? If you don't have the internet, and most of these states are saying, "Oh, sign up for an appointment with the internet." Or if you're over the age of 60 or 65 and you don't know anything about how to go online and sign up, how do you get your vaccine? Is there anybody thinking about those things in these states? And that's why it's important to have real leadership and people who are sensitive to the problems and the issues that people are dealing with. And that's why it's important that you all get involved. Just do something. If it's not running for office, run for your precinct. Become your precinct captain or your precinct president, or become the first vice chair or second vice chair or chair of your county party. Run for one of the vice chairs of the state party. Do something. Get on the executive committee, but do something. And don't sit back and say, "Well, I wish the Democratic Party." No, you are the Democratic Party. So you can't wish anything unless you are doing it. We are in this together, my friends. I don't have all the answers. Kylie doesn't have all the answers. Jason doesn't have all the answers. And we can't do all the work. We all have to be in this together. We are our keepers as a family, as a political family. And so we need you to run for something. We absolutely, this should be our goal going into 2022. We should leave no space blank. None. Let's have a contrast in everything. And I don't care if it's the reddest seat ever and we think, "Oh, there's no way we will ever win that." Well, hell, we won't win it if nobody runs for it. So that's the one certainty that we got, that Democrats can't win a seat that we don't run for. So run for it. Get your aunt, your grandma, your uncle, your aunt, your cousin, get them off the couch, do whatever, get them to run. And listen, and I know folks, well, raising the money, I know it's hard. It is hard. It is not easy being a candidate. I understand that wholeheartedly. And I know folks, well, the Democratic Party isn't giving me money. And I can tell you, folks, parties and state parties don't have the money to write everybody a check. They just don't. That's just the reality. We are not the other side. We don't have these deep pockets that can just write hundreds of millions of dollars of checks, and then therefore we can hand them all out to everybody that runs. There's some of that work that you're going to have to do, and that means picking up the phone and calling your neighbors and friends and family and all to ask them to support your efforts. But it's important for us to have that contrast. And so I ask you to do it. We will do everything that we possibly can to support our state parties so that they can support you all when you do run. But we just need you to run.
Great. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And I especially appreciate the sentiment that we all need to do our part. I have, a former staffer who made a little tote for me that said, you know what the Democratic Party ought to do? Because we get a lot of those comments, and what we need is someone stepping up to do those things that they think we ought to do. Because like you said, we are all the Democratic Party. It's not any one person or any small group of people. It's everyone who's on this call and everyone who's engaged. And so appreciate that. This next question comes from Bill, who is a Texas State Executive Committee man. And Bill has some questions about, just wants your thoughts on how you deal with a state as geographically large and rurally diverse as Texas is. He notes that there are over 200 rural counties spread across separate, distinct regions. Rural East Texas is different than rural West Texas, different from the Valley. And certainly, that kind of translates to your job as chair of these United States, our whole, our Democratic Party across all of these areas. So just, wants your thoughts and insights on that question, Jamie.
Well, Bill, listen, Texas is a big state, a big state. It takes, when I remember when Bejo was running for Senate, and I heard that he had visited every single county in Texas, I was tired just listening to it. That's a big state to cover, and it's a very diverse state. And you're right. And I think what we have to understand, and I think we are well equipped because the Democratic Party is very diverse. We are well equipped to deal with that diversity. I think Texas is on the cusp. I believe it is the next Georgia or Arizona there. And we can do so much. We can do so much in order to help get over the hump. And when Texas gets over the hump, game over for the Republicans. Game over. Particularly on the presidential level. So we got to do all that we can to help build capacity, I believe, on a local level in Texas. And, I was just with Secretary Castro the other day, and he and I were chatting, and he said, Jamie, part of our problem is that, some of our county parties are just in desperate need of leadership and resources. And we got to figure out how we do that. How we bring that to bear, because they are the conduits by which they get the message out to the people in those areas. And I think a lot of people are being left out and not being touched. And so it is not an easy, there's not one, easy solution to it. It's just that we're going to have to work really hard building capacity of the state party, which Gilberto Hinojosa, who's the state party chair, a dear friend of mine, and he's working his behind off each and every day to bring resources into Texas. And I'm going to work with him on that because I think we really have to dig deep. But when he is well resourced, then he can make sure that on a local level, we have the capacity to do the things there, to have organizers on the ground in all of the areas, and to make sure those organizers are reflective of the diversity of the communities that they're working in. I think is equally important.
Jamie, I'm going to jump in here before we go to Kylie with the last question. I know we have you until 5:30, Mr. Chairman, so we're going to use every minute. But wanted to, again, just say really quickly that these are great questions coming in the Q&A. We aren't going to be able to get to all of them, but I encourage you to please email me directly. I will respond to all of these, but please get back to me. And I'll hand it over to Kylie for the last question.
Awesome. Thanks, Libby. Kind of dovetailing back to a question we had touched on from Anderson, and Anderson mentioned the name before. Anderson was an organizer in rural North Carolina. And one of the questions that Anderson posed, and that I think we will have here in North Dakota and other smaller states too, is if we will invest in year-round organizing. And maybe that gives you a chance, Jamie, to talk about the 50-state strategy and what we're doing in air quotes off years, because we know there are no off years in the Democratic Party.
Yes, there are no off years in the Democratic Party, and we have to focus on organizing. One of the great innovation last cycle was Tom created the organizing corps, where we had well over 1,000 young people from communities representing all communities. I think over 50% of them were diverse hires on the ground, organizing some of our battleground communities. We're looking at what does organizing 2.0 look like, and how can we spread this out into states, how we can make sure that we have organizers on the ground in rural communities, how we can engage in digital organizing as well. And so we are looking right now at how we can extend those efforts. But I can tell you specifically, North Carolina is going to be a hot area for us. There is going to be a very contested U.S. Senate race in North Carolina this cycle. And so I've talked to a number of the candidates there. So people who are thinking about running on the Democratic side. And so it's going to be a state that, we're going to pay attention to all states, but it's going to be a state where there's going to be a lot of national focus as well. And we're going to do all that we can to make sure that we can take advantage. My short-term goals are to make sure that we protect our majorities and that we grow them in the 2022 cycle, that we actually make history. And that's very important to me. So, just look to hearing more from us about how we're organizing, how we're going to provide more trainings available for all of you, so that not only that you can that you get training, but you are trained to train other folks so that we can get them organized as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Jamie. Libby, do we have any closing comments that you wanted to share before we close out? I think, Mr. Chairman, I know you've got a really busy schedule, and so we're really grateful for you spending an entire hour with us tonight.
Happy to do it. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely.
No, thank you, everybody. And again, please know that my email is in your inbox if you received the registration for this, and Kylie is a resource as well, and happy to connect you. But we're looking forward to being under the leadership of a dirt road Democrat. And thank you all so much for joining.
And Libby, one of the things I would want to add, folks, please send Libby your suggestions. Again, we don't have all of the answers. Many of you know what needs to happen in your communities. Many of you have good suggestions on what we could do better as a Democratic Party. This is your opportunity. This is your opportunity to send in your suggestions on things that we can do, and we'll take a look at it. I am a throw everything on the wall, see what sticks type of guy, because that's what we have to do at this point in time. And we just got to figure out ways to win, figure out ways in order to get more people on our side, to support our candidates in every November. And so if you all have some of the secret sauce and you know things that could work well and how we can improve our outreach efforts, make sure you share that with us. We would greatly appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. And one of the questions I saw in closing in the chat was how we get involved with the training opportunities with the DNC. And so I'll just make note that Libby and I will make sure we get out that information on the Best Practices Institute, because the team there does incredible work, and we want to make sure that as many people are plugged into that as possible. But moving forward, as has been said, we want to hear from you. We want you to be engaged, not only in the Rural Council, but the party at large. Get involved with your state party and your local party, and know that all of us are here to support you. And the Rural Council will be successful because of your feedback, your input, and your involvement. We need people not just to show up to calls and video chats, but to hopefully also be out there in your communities engaging with voters. And we want to help make sure that you have the tools and resources and the confidence to do that. So thank you so much for taking time to be with us today. Again, we're very excited about the great turnout and hope that we can keep all of you as a part of our team moving forward. Have a great night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.